Hello, and welcome to the Amateur of Life and Death podcast. I'm Laura East. Each episode takes a look at a different aspect of the wonderful world of amateur theatre and features an amateur theatre maker talking about their theatrical life, theatrical loves, and the times when they've died on stage. In this month's episode, our Backstage Pass holder, John O'Neill, speaks with director Dewi Johnson, who's recently been working in London's West End theatres, including as Associate Director on Simon Nye's The Crown Jewels at the Garrick Theatre, starring Murray and Mel Giedroyc, and as Assistant Director on Ben Elton's stage production of Upstart Crow, starring David Mitchell. You'll find Dewi's resume contains its fair share of comedy. Dewi's journey from teenage director to drama school student to West End Associate Director took him through the Crescent Theatre Birmingham along the way. Here, Dewi's also had amateur experience over the last 11 years, including as an actor, costume designer, set designer, and of course director, most recently directing the Crescent's dazzling 2019 production of Jessica Swale's semi-musical play Nell Gwynn, set during the heart of the Restoration period in England in the late 1600s. Dewi's expertise in, and love of, the Restoration-era theatre is an absolute gift to his cast and crew, and so, of course, to the audiences too. Let's go to John O'Neill to hear more about Dewi's amateur and professional journey. John?
Thanks, Laura. For this episode, I'm joined by someone who grew up in amateur theatre, but who has taken that leap into the professional realm. I'm joined by none other than Dewi Johnson. Dewi, welcome.
Hello.
Dewi, you have recently spent time in the West End of London, working on a play that ran at the Garrick Theatre and starred Murray of pub landlord fame in a period comedy. And not long before that, you were working at the Apollo Theatre in the West End again on a comedy starring David Mitchell of Peep Show and Would I Lie to You fame. Have you come back down to earth yet?
Not yet. I still look back on it like, there's nothing like making breakfast in the morning going, okay, right, I've got to message Murray about this. I've got to, and you do sit there sometimes and you're like, this is my life.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an odd one.
Yeah. Were they nice people? I mean, dish the dirt.
They were lovely. And the biggest, I remember on day one of walking into Upstart Crow, David Mitchell was the last to walk in. And honestly, I was like, oh my God, like, it's David Mitchell. And you get chatting to him about, like, public transport and the nightmare on the tube, and you're like, oh, you are a human.
Yeah,
and
normal people.
Yeah, and Murray, I got on so well with, because in my head, I was expecting the pub landlord persona.
Yes.
But he's nothing like that in real life. And, he studied history at Oxford or Cambridge.
Oh God, that's a surprise.
So he's such a history buff. So we used to sit there and talk about history podcasts that we were listening to at the time. And you could he's got a really great party trick where you just say a random year to him. So you could be like 1423, and he can list off 5 great things that happened in that era.
So his character is a complete persona.
Yeah. It's complete act.
Wow.
And, you sit there and you're just like, you are so clever. And the fact that you can then play this character, he's in real life, he's such a gentleman.
And is David Mitchell, is he wisecracking jokes all the time, or does he say, because they say some comedies are actually, some comedians are actually quite depressed people. Is that true of David Mitchell, or is he a quiet guy?
David Mitchell, David was so lovely that quite a lot of the time, like, we'd all go for a drink as a company, and he would start on a story and you would be crying because he was so witty, and just his turn of phrase is like no one I've ever met. And it's so, like, when you watch him on these panel shows, you're just like, yeah, that is him. That is him in real life.
Yeah. Because you've got to have a wit, of course.
I
know if I was on a panel show, my wit is so slow that I would think of a joke 10 minutes after it all ended. But I suppose he has to be straight on it, and that's
I'm the same as you,
isn't it? Yeah.
I'm the same as you in the fact that I'll be there like, what's going on? What's just happened? Whereas these people can whip it out straight away.
Yeah. So to speak. I made a wisecrack there, yeah, so maybe I can do it. So, Dewi, you have your own theatre company, Foppish Theatre. You have specialised in Restoration Theatre and Theatre of the 18th century. Now, for the uninitiated, Restoration Theatre came to being in the 1660s. It got its name because both the British monarchy and theatre were restored after being banned. King Charles II came back from France, where he had patiently waited out the English Revolution. He scrapped a Puritan ban on plays, playhouses and actors, and he himself favoured French styles of theatre, as they were then, light-hearted satire, and for the first time women were allowed on stage, Nell Gwynn being one of the first female actors. What is it about this period in particular, because it's pretty niche, that interests you, and how has that interest shaped the opportunities you've had?
It is niche, and the amount of interviews I've been in where they turn around and go, so can you tell us why you like this period of theatre no one likes? Because it is a Marmite period. People either really engage with it or they hate it with a passion. And I think that's to do with the period's got quite a bad reputation for just being fluffy things with fans and screaming at each other.
Sort of melodramatic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas so it all started when I was 17 and I was a student at Stratford-upon-Avon College. And the people who ran the course were amazing. They still do. It's a great course. I'd recommend it to anyone. And on this course, before I'd gone there, I thought all plays were like Ibsen's. You know, we're in a drawing room. It's all very
serious, dark drama.
Yeah, you know, something if I'm paying money, I want to be entertained. And I'm from a really working class background, so I was either going to the theatre watching these really posh, privileged people, or watching plays that, quite honestly, you could walk down Birmingham High Street and see for free. Do you know? I don't need to watch anything. I'm white and I'm oppressed. Oh, life is hard.
Yeah.
I'm not
Kitchen
going
sink dramas.
Yeah,
you are not into them.
Not into. They have a place.
Yeah.
They're just not my cup of tea. And then
so you don't go to theatre to cry, you know, sorrow. Whereas I quite like to be moved to tears. You don't want that.
I hate it.
Right.
And quite often, if it is a play like that, and it's nothing to do with the acting, it's nothing like that, I'll leave at the interval. Life's too short.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. But so we were given, for our final project, they gave us The Recruiting Officer by George Farquhar. Never had heard of it before, and it was this great late restoration comedy. And for, you know, a working class kid from Tyseley, you read this play and it just changed everything for me. The language, it's like sword fighting. It's so sophisticated, but yet so base. And I decided I need to know more about this period. Read every play I could find on it, really got into the history of why these plays were made. And then a few years later, I joined the Crescent, and the Crescent was staging a production of The Dispute by Marivaux, and it was directed by Andrew Cowie. Never heard of Marivaux before, but I was like, oh, it's that, you know, 18th century French era, I'll get into this. And from there, it really, like, now I think I've directed 3 or 4 Marivaux plays, and it was because of doing that play that really sparked the French 18th century stuff I was interested in. So, yeah, from that point then, I set up my own theatre company while I was at drama school, just specialising in these plays. And
did you know straight away that it was going to be a specialist theatre company, or did that sort of develop over time?
I kind of knew straight away. Purely, the reason the company was made was one of the units I had to do at drama school was you have to go and find a placement for a company. You do 3 weeks with them. And I looked everywhere to find a company that would specialise in this stuff, and one didn't exist. Right. And I decided, well, if one doesn't exist...
spotted a gap in the market.
Exactly. Being crafty, I was like, this is needed. No one's doing it.
Yeah.
You know, it's hard work. It's complicated work. Part of the reason I wanted to go to a drama school I did was because there's a specialist called Annie Tyson who specialises in this period, who taught there.
Right.
So it was going like, I'm going to learn from the best people in the industry so I can make this company work. And, you know, we've brought stuff to the Crescent, we've took stuff to London, and we've got a really good reception for it. And what we're finding is, especially with the rise of Bridgerton and all these costume dramas,
it's back in vogue.
It's back in vogue.
Yeah.
It's
That's
starting to go out
doing,
again.
Isn't it?
Well, I don't want to say full
you are
credit,
the butterfly that's flapped the wings.
But
now we've got a hurricane of Bridgerton.
But Stranger Things has ruined it.
Right.
Everyone's into 80s now,
Yeah.
just not 1780s. What can you do?
What can you do? So, you started out in amateur theatre, specifically here at the Crescent Theatre, as you've said, but have since gone on something of a journey. So you've taken us on some way of that journey. So you went to Stratford, then you went to a drama school, and you knew there would be a specialist in restoration and 18th century. Which drama school was that?
So I trained at the Drama Centre London.
Right.
I was Group 54, for anyone who else has been there.
Was that a long time ago? What year are we talking?
I went to drama school in 2015,
right.
and then graduated in 2019 because I stayed on and did my masters. Okay. But I'd started directing at 15 properly. What happened was, while I was at
15 years old.
Yeah, at 15 years old.
So you were still at school.
Yes, and I was a lot more bolshy, and I decided I wanted.
Do you think you're less bolshy now?
From what I used to be, yeah, I've calmed down a lot, which is a bad thing actually, because back then I had no qualms of.
Yeah. Well, you have no fear to a degree. You've got a bit no fear when you're.
I'm glad you think that, because I'm one of them people who's like, oh God, you're up all night thinking of the money. But when I was 15, I wrote to Birmingham City Council and said, I want to put on a play, give me money. And funnily enough, they did. They wrote back to me and said, yes, we'll assign you a youth opportunity worker. And they gave me, I think, if I look back at it now, over the course of 3 years, they gave me about £10,000.
Oh my gosh.
And I staged Alice in Wonderland, Beauty and the Beast, The Sound of Music, just with local people in the community. They're all about my age, maybe like.
And where would you perform these plays?
We performed them at. It was this school that had this huge theatre at the side of the school, and we got it for free. And so
you didn't have any venue costs, and your actors were free.
Yeah, and we used to rehearse in community centres.
Right. So you had to pay for the rehearsal at the community centres. No, so that was free as well.
We had Labour government, so very invested in the arts. But all this, so we'd buy reams of fabric and wood, and I was really lucky that my dad's a builder, so he would build the sets for us. I conned my mum into doing the sewing, so she would make, when we did The Sound of Music, I remember us having arguments because there are only so many costumes you can make for the Von Trapp children before you go mad. But they really supported me with it. So then when I turned, at the same time I was a part of the ITV workshop, because I really wanted to be an actor, so I was doing bits on doctors. I remember doing a documentary for Teachers TV, and then I went to Stratford College. While I was at college,
so already before college, you'd already done an extraordinary amount.
Looking back now, at the time you don't think of it. You're just like, oh, I'm doing what I want to do.
Life, you don't think about it.
And you're getting your friends on a Sunday morning. You all put a tenner in every month to hire a scout hut, just so you can come and read scripts and play. Let's have a go at this play this week. And then when I got to college, one of my lecturers sat me down and he said, don't take this the wrong way. You're not ever going to make it as an actor. But from what I've seen, you'd be a really good director. You should really pursue that. So I said, yep, you're completely right. This is what I'm going to do.
Did you feel a bit crestfallen, or did you kind of know that already?
I kind of knew. And I think if he had never told me that, my life would have been so much worse. The fact that, he sat down this 18-year-old kid and said, the thing you're dreaming of doing, don't, because you'll get nowhere. I look back now and I go, that changed everything for me. And he set me on the right path. So my best friend at the time is an actor called Luke Grant. He still is my best friend now. And he had decided, once we had left college, I'm going to try and get some experience. So he joined the Crescent Theatre. And he said, I'm working with this really great director on the production of The History Boys where you can watch it. And I was like, yeah, I'd never been the Crescent in my life. For me, I always thought amateur theatre was, we'll do Calamity Jane the musical, and so I'd come along, sit at the very back of the auditorium, and it was amazing. As this 18-year-old kid sat there watching it, I was like, this is as good as any rep theatre production I've ever seen, and it persuaded me to join. So the next day, I came into the theatre, signed the forms to be like, I want to be a member, I want to join here. A week later, had a tour from Vera Dean, and Vera gave me the best advice to joining the Crescent, which is never wait for an invite. If you want to do something, do it.
Yeah.
Write to people. Don't sit at home waiting for them to call you.
Yeah, give yourself a job.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I wrote. My friend Luke had then been cast in another play that was directed by Alan Marshall called 2 Weeks with the Queen. So I wrote to Alan and said, I want to be a director. Can I talk to you about it? And I turned up on the Tuesday night at 5 o'clock, had coffee and a chat with Alan. By 6 o'clock, he asked me if I'd like to shadow him on that production. Half an hour later, I'm in the production meeting for it. Then I'm in a rehearsal for it. And by the end of the rehearsal, he's like, because you'll be here every week, do you want a minor part in it? And then
cast as well.
Got cast as well. And then 2 weeks later, someone had to leave the production. So I got bumped up to a different part. And then from there, ended up in The Dispute with what Andrew Cowie directed.
Yes. Which, of course, was a pivotal moment.
Pivotal moment. And I used to take, I don't know if you know, I think I've said it to him since, but I used to take a little notebook with me to rehearsals, and he would say stuff that was so inspiring, and I'd just write it down in my little notebook and be like, I'll use that one day. And I do. Like, he's got certain little phrases that I still use in my rehearsal rooms. Then it all changed for me because I got asked if I'd like to do Lord of the Flies as assistant director to Ian Mole, who was the director who directed The History Boys the previous year with Lucan. And I was like, yes, this is the director whose work made me join the theatre. I'd love to work for you. And as I started working for him, I started to find out he was a professional director in his own right. He'd spent years directing opera. And we really got on. And he took me for a gin one night after rehearsals, and he explained his life story. And he said, basically, when he was starting out, a doctor paid for his education. And the only condition was he had to pass the ladder down, didn't want paying back. You have to do it again for someone one day. And from that point on, he became my mentor. So it'd be like 10 o'clock at night, and I'd get a phone call off him saying, be ready for 7 o'clock in the morning. We're off to Chichester. I've booked us tickets for Gypsy. Never took a penny off me for anything. And he showed me a whole world of theatre I'd never seen before. Every time I'd see him, he'd throw a stack of books at me saying, you've got to read these. Films I'd never heard of, you've got to watch these.
And you did. You were...
Yeah, for 2 years, I followed that man around, did everything he said, and I was so thankful for it, because if it wasn't for someone like that, I would never have seen half the things I'd seen. I would never have experienced opera if it wasn't for Ian and Alan Marshall telling me, you've got to go to the opera, you've got to go to the opera, you'll learn stagecraft. Never would have done half these things. Those 3 years at the Crescent and under Ian really made me go, okay, I know this is an industry now I want to go into. I kind of know how to navigate it, but the next step for me was going to drama school.
Yeah. And so before you've even got to drama school, you've already got this really big, well-trodden view of all these different types of theatre.
Yeah, and Ian was setting up his own theatre company at the time with Dom Thompson. They were setting up Gritty Theatre. So I assisted on all of their stuff. And because it's, low budget to no budget, you're beg, borrowing, stealing, you're learning how to make the vision with no budget. Ian let me direct my own show for that company. And it was, you hit the ground running. And if you fail, the stakes aren't that high. And Ian was really good at going, you need a training ground. This is how you'll learn how to do it.
So then you were in drama school.
Then I got into drama school in 2015, and I got onto the director's course at the Drama Centre, which I wanted to go because Annie Tyson was there teaching restoration comedy, and the head of the director's course was Anthony Clark, who was the associate director at Birmingham Rep in the 80s, 90s. And the course I was on, they took 15 actors, 4 directors, and on the director's course, you had to do all the actors' classes to understand the actors' process.
Right, interesting. I was going to ask you that if you did any acting on it.
Yeah, so you do 2 years full actor. Everything an actor does, you had to do.
Right.
So, you're strolling in the morning, you're doing 4 hours of ballet, then you're doing a scene study class.
Now? Have you kept it up?
I have kept my ballet up because for the work I do with restoration, you need like an understanding of the way the body moves.
Yeah.
And ballet is that closest.
So for restoration, it's quite stylised movement, you'd say?
Yes, I would. Mainly, like, if you ever play a soldier during that period, all soldiers at that point in history were ballet trained. So, that's where you learn to stand. And if you have a look at...
So they trained them on the barracks, they trained them ballet?
Well, I wouldn't say on the barracks, but like before they joined the army, it was part of basic training.
Right.
If you look at fencing and sword fighting from that period, all the preparation moves are the same as ballet. Yeah. The first, the second.
Yeah, that's true, I can see that.
So again, it's just underpinning the work I do. And then when I was really lucky when I finished my first year of drama school, I got accepted at the Royal Opera House to be an assistant observer on a revival of the Barbara Seville. So I spent my whole summer...
Assistant observer?
Yeah.
What is the role of an assistant observer? Do you literally just observe?
So you turn up and you observe the rehearsal process, but at the same time they teach you how to be an assistant. So I got taught how to mark up a book, how to work with professionals of that calibre. And you're a stand-in as well, because not every singer can make every rehearsal. So, sometimes I would turn up and I'd have these world-class singers just singing these arias in my face as if I'm the other person in the scene with them. And like that summer, I was like...
Did you have to sing back?
No.
No, okay.
You stand there miming, just going... La, 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 la. And while I was there, I got some really great advice from the assistant there saying, make your own work. Again, don't wait for an invitation, just do it. Yeah. So that... I then called Andrew Lowry back in Birmingham, who was the chairman of Crescent at the time, and said, I would like to hire the studio for one day. Would you be able to do it at a good price? And he said, yeah, no problems. We'll support you. So they let me have the theatre for one night, and I went back to my drama school and said to the people in my class, I've got the Crescent Theatre in Birmingham for one night. Who wants to put on a play? And we put on Marivaux's The Will. We set up Foppish Theatre and we revived that show, I think, 3 times in the end and took it all the way to London.
Was that the first time you used the name Foppish Theatre?
Yes.
Right. So that was where it was born.
That was where it was. If it wasn't for that assistant at the Royal Opera saying, make your own work, and the Crescent saying, yes, we'll support you with this project, I never would have made the company. Because it was just, again, I was getting older, I was losing that edge of, we can just do this.
Yeah, you start to be a bit intimidated by life.
Yeah. Terrified, going like, oh my God, if this doesn't make the money. And I think at one point we'd sold 10 tickets like the week before. And then on the actual night, we'd sold out entirely.
Oh, great. Was that in the studio?
In the studio, 120 seats.
Great.
For a play no one had ever heard of.
Yeah.
It was just, it made me go, oh, okay, there is a market for this. This is what I want to do. So, then graduated from drama school. Decided I'd have a bit of a break. Went into being a teacher at Stratford-upon-Avon College. So I went back, was a teacher, and then COVID hit. And everything shut. And you sit there and you go, I've just spent 4 years training in an area that the government has said is an essential, and we have no idea if, realistically, to say it now is melodramatic, but you look back then and you go, will the theatres ever open again?
Yeah, it was a scary time.
Yeah. I mean, the Crescent we had the set for the show you were in.
We were going into tech.
Yeah.
I think that play was cursed.
Well, that set lived on the Crescent stage for 6 months because no one could get in the building, could they?
Yeah. And they thought it might get on as well. Whenever we didn't know when this awful pandemic was going to end, but there was always that hope, wasn't there, that things would come back to normal.
But that's all you had hope of, like, oh, maybe one day it'll come back. So I played it safe, stayed being a teacher, and I was a teacher for 2 years at the college. Absolutely loved it, and nothing in life prepares you more for a rehearsal room than walking in a room trying to get 16-year-olds to do Shakespeare.
To concentrate.
Yeah, it puts the fear of God into you. And I say to anyone, if you ever want to be a director, go and be a teacher for a year, because it will make you. It'll make you or break you. But while I was being a teacher, I was applying, and I was getting final round at loads of places, like RSC. I was getting a final round for Welsh National Opera. Nothing was ever sticking, and I saw.
But you persevered.
I persevered, And
that's another thing, isn't it? To have that resilience to kind of take that constant rejection. Although you were getting to final round, you weren't getting in past the final round.
Yeah, and at one point you sit there and you're like, is there any point applying?
Is there any point?
Because clearly I'm missing something here. And then I saw Upstart Crow was looking for an assistant.
So stop right there.
Okay.
The next question is, you worked on Upstart Crow, a play by Ben Elton that was a TV show before it was a play, but the play was a brand new and distinct thing. It starred David Mitchell and it ran in the West End at the Apollo Theatre from September to December in 2022. It was a major production at a major theatre in London's world-famous West End. How did you land that one? What did you do?
So this is the weirdest of, like, I think of how I've got any job in life. So I was applying for like 2 years, getting nothing from anywhere. And an advert came out saying Upstart Crow is coming back to the West End, because Upstart Crow had opened 2 weeks before the pandemic. So it had got all these 5-star reviews. It was Olivier nominated. And then they got the phone call to say, we're closing the theatres. And they were just finding a time to revive it and bring it back. This was the right time. So the company were reviving the same production and they needed a new assistant director to come in. And I saw it and I was like, I'm never going to get this job. I don't have the experience. But the person directing it was Sean Foley, who was then the artistic director of Birmingham Rep. And I thought, I'm never going to get this job, but he will see my CV. So I'm going to submit for this job, knowing I'm never going to get called for an interview, but the head of Birmingham Rep will have seen my CV. So I submitted my CV, completely forgot about it, carried on applying for loads of other jobs at the time. And I got a phone call to say, you've been selected for interview. Would you like to book a time? So I booked it, and it was a Zoom interview.
Right, I was going to ask you that. Was it we were still in Zoom land?
We were still Zoom land. And they were like, you're having an interview with Sean. It will be 15 minutes long.
Did you dress up for Zoom?
I remember I wore a shirt.
Yeah.
And the Wi-Fi...
But nothing below the waist.
No, nothing below the waist. The Wi-Fi in my house was so dodgy that at the time as well, I was teaching. So I had to set the students on task so I could go into a room.
Wow, so you were double bubbling.
Double bubbling.
Yeah. Moonlighting is a phrase.
Put a sign on the door being meeting in progress, do not disturb. And I sat there and Sean pops up and the first thing he says to me is like, restoration comedy, why that? And I was like, well, gave him the whole spiel of how I fell in love with it. Yeah. Talked about our disdain for how the industry doesn't really recognise comedy as great as it is. And that was it. It was literally 10 minutes and he was like, so you're from Birmingham? And I said, yes. He's like, have you done scheduling before? Yes. And you like comedy? Yes. Okay, cheers, thanks. And I was like, I've not got this interview.
So you didn't get a good vibe?
Didn't get a good vibe. And I was like, he's absolutely lovely. I'd love to work with him one day. He knows who I am. This just isn't the right project. That interview, I think, was at like 4 o'clock. At 6 o'clock, I had a reference request come through.
Oh, that's a good sign.
And I was like, oh my God, it's a good sign.
Yeah.
And then the next day, they made a formal offer. And said, you've got 2 weeks, you can relocate to London. Relocated down to...
They gave you 2 weeks to relocate to London?
I've interviewed for jobs before where if you got the job, you had to... It was for Welsh National Opera, and if I'd got the job, I'd have to have relocated to Cardiff within 3 days.
So hang on, you're in the middle of a teaching job. You've literally moonlighted the job to do the interview, and then they're saying to you at this theatre company, Sean Foley's theatre company, right, you've got to drop your life now, shelve it, within 2 weeks, move to London.
And what made it worse was that week...
Could you actually do that?
Well, that week I'd been offered a permanent... Because I was freelance at the college, I'd been offered a permanent contract and was about to sign it to say, I'll be here permanently. I loved my job teaching, but it wasn't what I'd trained for or wanted to be.
Yeah.
So I went in and I spoke to my boss, who was my teacher 10 years ago. And And they said, go for it. Job's waiting for you when you get back. We'll keep it.
That's nice.
Yeah.
That's nice.
So within 2 weeks, I moved in with a friend who I'd met at the Crescent. He had relocated to London. Moved in with him. Started on Upstart Crow. And the first day was just a baptism of fire. So before I went into rehearsals, I was sent the DVD of the original stage show. Because we were just doing a plain revival of it, and I marked up my prompt book from that, and we did the get to know you's welcome, blah blah blah, and then Sean went, right, I haven't done this play for 2 years, over to Dewi. And the first scene I'm there directing David Mitchell and Gemma Whelan.
What? So literally the whole rehearsal's just started, and the director says, right, you do this.
Yeah, and it would be, I would.
Did you sort of go?
But you know when.
Right, I'm going to bullshit my way through this, or were you just like, I know it perfectly?
I'll be perfectly honestly, I bullshitted my way through, because you're sat there and you're going, I'm with top tier industry people, like the stage manager.
You can't fold at that point, can you? You've got to just go for it.
The stage manager we were working with was Jo Miles, who's West End royalty. If you open a big show in the West End, you call her, and she sat next to me, and I'm like, you fake it or you
it's sink or swim.
So I just went with it, and from that point, me and Sean had a good rep. I would go in and be, this is the staging for the scene. He would then go in and do the work on it.
So you sort of had to set out the staging and set out where the characters were.
Yeah, and their entrance, exits, their journeys.
And then Sean will kind of step in with the fine tuning.
Yeah.
Right.
And then we had.
And did you know that was the dynamic?
No.
Right.
It was you learned this
as you went.
Within 2 minutes of being there.
Right.
And there was a lot of the actors.
What if you hadn't watched the DVD? You would have been in so much trouble.
I know. I was sat there and every night I was going over from rehearsals, re-watching that DVD, making sure the notes were right. Yeah. Because you don't want to look at it in front of David Mitchell. No. And it was absolutely amazing. And we finished that project, and I was like, okay, that's it. I've done a turn on the West End. It's never going to happen again. So I went back to teaching for a month. And the phone
came back to Birmingham.
And I was been teaching for a month, and then the phone rang, and it was Hampstead Theatre saying, would you interview for Lincoln Mulhern? It's a new production. The director's requested you. I was like, who's the director? And it turned out it was a year previously I'd made it to the final for the Order of Roses at the RSC. And the director remembered me from that. And he called me up for a different company to come in on that. And that was this big 18th century story. Yeah. So
for Upstart Crow, for the listener, if you haven't clocked it, it's a Shakespearean era play. So that goes in with the period you're interested in. This next one is the period that you're interested in. It's that gap in the market, isn't it?
So they called me up, and I ended up doing loads of historical advisory work on it. So I was giving seminars to the cast about facts of that era, what life is like for an average 18th century person. And yet that was great. Halfway through that run, I then got offered to direct a show at Birmingham Breakfast Sky, who every year do this amazing competition called Sky Comedy, where it takes new comedy writers, new plays, and puts them on for a week in a fully staged production. While I was on that, Sean then called me up to the office and was like, I'm doing a brand new comedy by Simon Nye, who wrote Men Behaving Badly in the Durrells. It's all about the life of Charles II. It's called The Crown Jewels. We're opening it in London, which for a new play to open in London is quite rare. And he said, it's exactly your era. Do you want to be associate on it? So it was making that next step as well from assistant to associate. Again, I was like, yes, cannot wait to do this. And then the cast for that got announced, and that was insane because you had Mel Giedroyc, you had Neil Morrissey.
I was here in it.
Yes. Okay. You had Joe Thomas, who was Simon in The Inbetweeners, Carrie Hope Fletcher, musical theatre royalty. It was just this huge array of stars. And again, but I could walk into that room prepared. I'd worked with Sean twice before. I knew this era like the back of my hand. I was ready for it. And so we did that. Then that went on a UK tour. part of...
And you were in it, weren't you?
You've
glossed over that. You were actually on the boards with those people.
So what happened was certain people in the production had NAs in there when it got to contract stage. And
what does NAs mean?
Just not available.
Right.
So we were sat around and when it comes to cost, you go, right, we can pay someone extra to come in and you pay them $600 a week to do nothing, basically sit there, and we'll need them 3 times to go on. Or we can invest that money elsewhere in the production. And I said, I'll go on in that because it wasn't, most of the time it was a non-speaking role.
Yeah.
So I ended up covering...
Just got to look pretty in the background.
Just got to look pretty in the background. Yeah. So
with a nice wig on, I imagine. Or something.
It was... Well, this was the thing. It was the height of summer in London in full 17th century, 3-piece thick velvet suit, long Charles wigs. I have never sweated so much in my life.
Did you have a fan?
Weren't allowed them.
You weren't allowed
No.
them? Too distracting.
Too distracting.
Yeah.
So, you'd run off stage and you'd stand in front of the big electric fans at the side of the stage just to keep...
What about powder?
Cool.
Did you try powder to soak up the sweat?
I bathed in talcum powder.
Yeah.
It was an experience. But it was such a fond experience, going up and down the country with your ragtag band of television stars, putting on this comedy that... Yeah, it was a job that I'll always look back and go, I loved doing that.
Yeah, amazing. So, London's West End is home to some amazing and treasured playhouses, famous the world over. The Apollo Theatre, which hosted Upstart Crow, is one of those, as is the Garrick Theatre, which hosted...
Crown Jewels.
The Crown Jewels, of course. The Apollo is on Shaftesbury Avenue. It opened at the turn of the 20th century in 1901. It is fronted in Renaissance style and has a 4-level auditorium with 3 cantilevered balconies. The Apollo can seat 757 audience members, and the 3rd-tier balcony is considered the steepest in London. Laurence Olivier trod the boards there in 1928, Gielgud in 1968, and Peter O'Toole in 1987. So, when you moved from the rehearsal room into that space, were you not a bit intimidated to be working there? What was it like? Was it dilapidated or was it in good nick? Were there rats? Were there mice?
As soon as you walk in, before you're allowed on stage, you have to have a meeting with the theatre manager just to welcome you into the building because you're going to be living there for 3 months. And I always laugh because the first thing they do is they hand out plastic Tupperware boxes to you all. And the first thing they say is, this is London. The building is infested with mice. If you're bringing food in, please leave it in these plastic tubs.
I thought you were going to say, catch the mice.
And it's, you'll be talking to an actor in a corridor and little mouse will just run past you. And you're just like, yep, okay, cool, yeah. That's where we're at. Yeah. They were experiences, you're walking into these places that I remember being a teenager and standing at stage door waiting for actors to come out and get their autographs. And you do have to pinch yourself when you're walking past people queuing for people's autographs and you're just signing in with your baguette.
And did you have that moment where you walked out upon the stage when there's nobody there?
Yeah.
And just looked out and just went, wow.
My phone is full of pictures of me just stood looking at it.
Yeah.
And it's, you're teching this show and the theatre is empty. You're running up and down aisles. You're running up to the balconies to check sight lines. And you do sit there sometimes and you're like, is this real?
Yeah, is it
because just as you said, you're looking at it and you're like, Laurence Olivier walks on that stage.
And is there like a feeling in that place? Is there an atmosphere or?
Yes, there is. And it's always when the house is about to open and you've got stewards and bar staff just getting in position, running around. And it's that feeling of like the calm before the storm, before the first few people walk in. And I can't really describe it because it is magical. Yeah. And I've been really lucky. It's when you're teching these shows and you sit on the front row. Like the first time it ever happened was when I was at Royal Opera and we're doing the first sing through with the full orchestra and I'm sat on the front row just behind the conductor watching this thing thing, I'm in like a £500 seat.
Yeah, you've got time to take it in then, I suppose,
Yeah.
because you're not doing anything for a second.
It is mad.
And what are the facilities like backstage? At the Apollo, what were the facilities like backstage? Was it sort of Edwardian decay, or is it quite modern?
No theatre backstage is modern. I think at the Crescent we're spoilt in the fact that, the decor in the change rooms is the 80s, rather than when you go into these old Western
new
theatres.
build. The Crescent was built in 97 or something like that. So you're going back a whole nother century before that.
Yeah, these are, there's not enough toilets. Right. When I was at the Garrick, they were ripping out the basement. Like they were making a basement in my dressing room to add a toilet. Right. Because, these buildings are so old that any cupboard they could find, they've put toilets in there now. So, yeah, I wouldn't be raving about, holidaying in one of these dressing rooms, because they aren't.
And are they small as well?
Yeah.
There are a lot of you crammed in there. Small, windowless, no air and no toilet.
No toilet. You're usually sharing a toilet with everyone on your floor. Yeah. Usually they're small, but there's a lot, so everyone gets their own dressing room.
Right. Oh, right, okay.
But you all spend time in each other's dressing rooms anyway, gossiping and chatting. It's just a dressing room. Yeah. You're never in there. Yeah. Everyone just sits, like when we all come in the afternoon ready to go on that night, you all sit on the front row of the stage anyway, talking and catching up about what was on telly last night.
We know the love of your life. You've told us about that. You've told us about your first theatrical love. Tell us about the one that got away.
This is going to sound really, really arrogant, but one has never got away. In terms of, there have been times where I've applied for a job and gone, oh, I wish I'd got that. But there's always been a reason I never got it. That, like, for example, that RSC job, I didn't get it, really wanted it. If I'd got that RSC job, I never would have got Upstart Crow, which means I never would have worked with Sean. Yeah. So I'm a big believer in, like, everything happens for a reason. Yeah.
But it's also a bit of a reflection on your mental attitude to it all, because the ones that got away, and actually you've said there's been loads that have got away.
Yeah.
There's been loads and loads. But when I ask you that question, you say, well, I'm not interested in any of those. I'm only interested in the ones that I've managed to get. And I've just been you've persevered so much that, you've managed to pin these things down and get hold of them.
At the time, I think I'm like, oh, well, I didn't get that one. But I do look back and I'm like, some of these, I was applying for stuff that I should never, ever work on. Like, I remember I applied for, there's a production of Hamlet opening in London, and I applied for the assistant on that and got to interview. And they were like, why do you want this? And I was like, well, I don't really. Yeah. I don't want to work on Hamlet. I'd much rather do The Rivals or something like that.
Yeah, that's not my niche.
No. And I see that at the moment, a lot of job offers are out there for, do you want to come and work on this serious play? Do you want to come and work on this piece of drama? And I'm like, no, I'd much rather go back to being a teacher than work on something I didn't want to do. Because I think life's too short.
What are your tips for keeping that positive mental attitude? How have you, do you think you're just naturally a resilient person? Or do you think you've coached yourself in some way to be that resilient, where you just kept going and you haven't listened when people have said, I'm not interested?
I never used to be. It used to really hit me. Like, oh, I didn't get that. Oh, I'm going to go on it.
Okay, so there was a time where it was like a gut punch.
God, yeah. Because but it was always then about, Ian taught me the best thing is you've got to separate the work and your life. And you can't sit there going, oh, I didn't get that job. That means I'm a worthless human. I'll never work. You sit there and you go, it's a job.
Yeah.
I'm still going to go home and see my family and have chicken nuggets and whatever. And I think you've got to really learn to leave your job at the door.
Yeah, you've got to be able to compartmentalise.
Yeah. And it's, there are times where I always work with friends in rehearsal rooms, and you could say something that could be quite upsetting, but you don't mean it because you're talking about the work, not the actual person.
Yeah, you're talking about the role and the performance.
Yeah. And I think you've got to, it's so easy to take everything to heart and to think everything's an attack. And I think you've just got to sit there sometimes and go, no one who I've ever met in this industry is there to be a bastard.
Yeah. So it's not necessarily about being thick-skinned. It's about separating out the personal from the professional.
Yeah. That's my big advice of it, is like the hats I have to wear in a rehearsal room. I have to be the second in command. I have to, sometimes lay down the law. But outside of the rehearsal room, I'll go to the pub with you. I'll have a drink with you, and it's about going, what hat am I wearing at what time?
Yeah.
And I think if you,
and would you raise things in the pub that you
never
sorted at the rehearsal room?
No,
you would leave it in the rehearsal room
because it's a different
realm.
Dewi.
Yeah.
That
makes sense to me.
I think that's, I know a lot of actors who are like, oh, I'm not getting this role, I'm not, and it ekes into their personal life and they put life on hold for work.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm very much like, no, I have my life. If I want to do something, I'll do it.
Yeah. Interesting. And the last question for this podcast interview, it's gone so fast. We've been talking for 45 minutes, believe it or not. Tell us about the time you died on stage.
It was in my first ever Crescent play.
Of course.
And it was directed by Alan Marshall, and it was in the studio at Christmas, and it was a play called 2 Weeks with the Queen. And this is how bad an actor I was. I actually don't know why my character was dying. But I just remember in one scene, I came on in a wheelchair, asked for a bag of tangerines, and the next time you saw my character, I was an angel with a tangerine.
Oh, that's nice.
And to this day, I should go back and reread that play and go, actually, what was wrong with my character? Why did he die?
You actually physically died on stage?
Physically died on stage.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a lot of, I don't know my line. I should probably make something up here. That's an everyday thing for me. But no, that was an actual physical. The character died. And one day I will go back and find out why he died.
Dewi, I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed unpacking all of your recent history.
It's been a blast.
And the journey that you've had, and the sights that you've seen, and the work you've done to get there. It hasn't just landed in your lap. You've worked hard to get there. So thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been a blast. And, we'll always be a part of the Crescent. I've just rejoined.
Thank you very much.
Cool. Thank you.
That was John O'Neill at the Crescent Theatre talking to Dewi Johnson. You can find out more about Dewi's directing and outreach work at his website, www.dewijohnson.com. That's DEWIJOHNSON. Dewi's upcoming work includes the West End and Dublin productions of Dr. Strangelove, written by Armando Iannucci and Sean Foley, beginning in October 2024 at the Noel Coward Theatre, London. Thank you for listening to the Amateur of Life and Death podcast. If you'd like to listen to more, make sure you subscribe at podcast.crescent-theatre.co.uk or via Spotify or Apple Podcasts to get the next episode. You can find out more about the Crescent Theatre Birmingham and our upcoming productions, including Lolita Chakrabarti's Red Velvet and our West Midlands and Worcestershire summer tour of Charlie's Aunt, by visiting www.crescent-theatre.co.uk or by following us on social media. Amateur of Life and Death is a Crescent Theatre production. This episode was researched and presented by Laura East and John O'Neill. The music is by Brendan Stanley, and the podcast is edited by Kevin Middleton.